Good morning, you all. Dr. Frannie, Dr. Dasgupta. We are very pleased to have you here with us today.
Good morning, Caroline. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very, very happy to be having this conversation with Dr. Dasgupta, whom I will introduce in a minute.
Amazing, Dr. Leautier. Just to remind all that the SouthBridge Group is the partner organization of the Brazil-Africa Forum. So, Dr. Leautier, please go ahead. We are here just waiting to listen to you and catch a few of your thoughts today.
Fantastic. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who are joining us today. We have an exciting theme to go in this dialogue that I'm fortunate to have with Dr. Ani Dasgupta, President and CEO of the World Resources Institute. So our theme this morning is on water governance and sustainable solutions, and particularly, how do we avoid a water crisis? So Dr. Dasgupta, I would like to ask you, because of the work that you do at the World Resources Institute, that the world is facing escalating water-related challenges. And these challenges are being compounded by climate change, but also by rising urbanization. So from your perspective, what are the implications of these water-related risks for Africa?
Annie, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to do this and be part of the Brazil-Africa Forum. It's an absolute pleasure. Frannie, first, I'm very glad you asked the question in Africa, not in a particular country or a city, because I think we have to look at what's happening macro issue across a whole region. And I think three things are happening at the same time. In all over sub-Saharan Africa, because of climate change, there is overall water scarcity, not just for cities, just overall scarcity of potable water. Drinking water or potable water is, it's a finite quantity. For any ecosystem, it's a finite quantity. So it is actually getting reduced because of climate change. That's one thing that's happening. So if you draw a map of Africa and you map where the water scarce is, there would be a particular region that will be actually in dire straits, most probably just south of the sub-Saharan border. But then the second thing that is happening is enormous. It's the fastest urbanizing region in the world. African cities are growing. African population is moving from rural population as the fastest. This is at this point the fastest place. So what does that mean? When cities, regions urbanize, water demand per capita increases. This is just a well-known fact. So in Africa's case, it's astronomical, actually. The demand for water for urban residents from 2005 to 2030, just 9 years from now, will increase by 300%, 4 times more water is needed. So if you think about a situation where there's a finite quantity of resource that is reducing and the demand for water is increasing, of course, think about this differently. We have to think about the solutions differently, the institutions differently, how do we finance differently. The last thing I want to say, Frannie, that is pertinent to Africa, the African urbanization that we're witnessing right now is actually quite different from the Latin American urbanization. So Brazil, for example, is one of the more urbanized global South countries in the world right now, or even the East Asian urbanization. Both those urbanization took place with the associated economic growth in those cities. There's a concurrence between economic growth and the population shift to urban development. That is not the case in Africa. In most of the places, cities are growing without the concurrent that we have witnessed before. So it's a kind of a different kind of urbanization. And the second difference in urbanization here, unlike East Asia, we are seeing much more population moving to smaller cities as opposed to mega cities. That creates, that actually, most of the science, that's a good thing in some ways, to distribute urban growth. But it creates a very peculiar issue that smaller cities, as you know, have less capacity and less public finances. So their ability to deal with relatively complicated problem is less. So what I'm simply saying, the African issue needs absolute attention at the macro level. Of course, the solutions are different in every country, but it is something we feel needs absolute focus. And an alarm bell should be rising across leadership in Africa on this topic.
Thank you very much, Annie. I think you've raised the reasons why we are focusing on the water resilience problem for Africa. And your institute published recently a report that looked at urban water resilience, and it highlighted those key risks for Africa that you've gone through in a preliminary manner now, and particularly the risks for urban areas and cities. So what pathways are there for action that would help Africa to address these challenges?
I think our research, Frannie, and I just want to say, though it was completely focused in Africa in the work we just published, as I will mention to you, the core outcome, they are very relevant to other regions in the world. They're very relevant to Brazil. So I hope our audience in Brazil actually will find relevance to what we're talking about. So I think there are four things I want to highlight. One is the fundamental thing is a mind shift change that we need. Why? Because what we've discovered is when you have a resource constraint overall, and as cities are growing, and cities are not only demanding water, as you know, historically, they're politically more powerful. So if there's a scarce resource, they're able to suck it up because they're able to pay more for it per unit, right? So that becomes an imbalanced system for the region. So one of the fundamental finding we find that we actually need a different approach where historically city and city leadership have focused on water distribution. They've seen their problem as they have water, their job is to distribute, meaning every population get it, the poor get it. That's been historically the way the problem has been defined. We think that is not a problem, definition of the problem, because the quantity of water itself will become an issue. So the mindset shift it means how can we think about water as a regional resource, and how can city and city regions work together, both for agricultural water, industrial water will increase, industries starting from food, beverage, anything you can think of, textile, require energy production, require enormous amount of water. So if you don't think about this together, all the systems will suffer. So our view is, first is how do you create institutions and thinking from the national government all the way to local government that allows us, and also the donor community, I must point this out. This is not, right now we see funding in pockets that is not helping the system. So first point is a systems approach to water is very, very much required. In most countries, Frannie, as you know, there is a ministry for irrigation. Sometimes there's a ministry of irrigation and water resources, two different, and then a completely different set of institutions for cities. And we have found, at least in the research in Africa, these are not connected at this point at the national level. So that's number one. The second is we need to absolutely have to focus on building cities differently. The way the cities are laid out and designed could be water resilient or not water resilient. Meaning we can design cities that consume less water and also is resilient to flood. It's not just scarcity of water. African cities are facing flood risks, as you know, right now, as we speak, is facing flood risks. So how do you build resilient infrastructure that is that helps cities to consume less, but also recycle? When you have a finite quantity, you have to capture every drop of water that is used and recycled in the system. So a systemic look at the regional level, but a systemic look inside a city level. We feel very strongly wastewater is an absolutely untapped resource. It has a lot of potential. It has potential for agriculture, potential for reuse, potential for energy generation. That is completely not looked at. This is something actually can put money back into the system. So the city level thinking. The two other things that we think are critical. One is focus on the poor. Why is that more critical? When you have any scarcity, like water or electricity or anything, poor suffer the most. This is just a historical fact. So when there is a water scarcity in Nairobi, it's not the rich are suffering. Rich are going and buying bottled water. It's the poor who are paying much more for a resource they already were paying more than the rich. So the systems has to, when you have a scarcity design, you have to focus on what's happening to the poor. This is as relevant in Africa as relevant in Brazil. The amount of urban poverty in Brazil is actually equivalent number. It's a very significant proportion of population. And the last is we absolutely have to think about financing in a different way. Water is a sector historically has attracted private finances at scale because most people are actually willing to pay for water. And it is a myth that poor don't pay. Poor actually end up paying more for water than the rich per capita.
simply because that's the way they receive it. So this is a sector, if you get it right, you can actually attract private capital. And my belief is there is reason to believe there is significant private capital, but you need to get the system right. These are the 4 lessons, Frannie, which I think are super relevant for Africa, but I think relevant universally.
Thank you very much for raising those 4 areas, because you argue that the pathways for Africa have to be different because of the differences in which Africa is being impacted by the water crisis. And so I'd like to ask you a question, since you have just come back from Glasgow, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to share any messages that you'd like to share with the audience listening in today on the theme that we are covering on the water adversity challenge, and how do we build resilience, the governance systems that you would need to have in place so that we can have a sustainable solution. And if you could particularly draw on what could Brazil learn from Africa and what could Africa learn from Brazil?
You all must have seen the outcome of COP. It was a intense 2 weeks. I was there for both weeks, and the overall outcome, as all, including us, have reported, is mixed. I think there were a lot of foundational gains towards keeping 1.5 alive. A lot of very significant agreements on forest, on coal, on methane, on different kinds of energy use, meaning on renewables, but also specifically on electrification. But overall, people, including us, didn't think that was enough to get to excitement out there. So it's a very mixed bag, and the most of the thing we think didn't happen enough is actually in financing. Financing specifically for poorer countries, finance for Africa, African countries, and financing for vulnerable countries and loss and damage. This issue we didn't think, and because of the financing, this whole idea of rebuilding solidarity across countries, the trust that is needed for us to have the cycle, we think was much less than desired. But so it's a mixed bag. So I just want to say this is where we are. A lot of people are writing, oh, this was a terrible outcome. I don't think it was all of it terrible. There were a lot of solid things that has happened, something to look forward to. We didn't believe before COP countries will agree to come back next year to increase their ambition, which is a very good thing that they agreed to. We never have seen language on fossil fuel in the document, which is very good to see. So, there are a lot of things that are there that are positive, but overall it's a mixed outcome. However, I do think this conversation, Frannie, there's a direct relevance to what happened in COP in multiple ways. One, nature was a big winner of this COP. This is the first time nature as an important component of a climate solution, both from forests, what from reforestation, what happens to the food system. This was a very big outcome. This happened in the first few days. 100+ countries agreed on the deforestation goal. And because we focus on nature-based solutions, which is very relevant to our conversation right now, had a very important focus. So I want to focus on a few things from that kind of an overall tone of the conversation that is relevant. One is the focus on nature, focus on forest, and focus on nature-based solutions as an extension of the discussion. This is critical because water systems or clean water systems anywhere in the world are very dependent on how healthy the upstream systems are of forest and land and things like that produces the clean water that we drink. So this systemic approach across watersheds, so we are talking across watershed, and protecting forests is a very important part of it. And focusing on nature-based solutions in downstreams, meaning in cities, in regions, to protect water systems was very. And I believe there will be a lot more focus going forward in this and financing for these solutions. We haven't seen enough focus on financing. So that's number one. This is directly important to the discussion we're having, both in Africa and also in Brazil. And Brazil actually has many opportunities for significant water of nature-based solutions in big cities. The cities we work in Sao Paulo and Rio, there are systems that are absolutely possible.
The second thing is a focus on adaptation. What we're talking about is really adaptation. How do you become our systems adapt to the climate change that's taking place, but make our systems much more resilient? So adaptation got a lot of focus and a lot of financing. People pledge. So this will be reflected on our ability to develop systems that are resilient. So I would expect that that will directly impact what the discussion we are having in system change at the local level, at the national level. So we should see much more adaptation finance from this transfer that we're taking place, and this will impact both Brazil and cities and regions in Africa. The third thing I must say, which I'm sure you would be very happy to hear, there was a very significant presence of private sector at this COP, very much more than we have ever had. And also the financing organization. So we used to have private sector as in businesses. We did not have private finance, private capital. This is the first time I've seen such a significant presence of private sector, including the initiative Mark Carney and others ran to bring private asset owners actually commit to net zero. And there was a significant announcement of $130 trillion of assets that will be net zero by 2050. That was a very significant move. What does that mean? I think it means two things for our discussion. One is, as private sector tries to become net zero themselves. So think about global companies. Think about Pepsi, for example, or Walmart, for example, or any of these global brands that have footprints everywhere in Africa. And as they try to become net zero, they will also have to figure out what to do with their own water footprint, because they're big Pepsis, for example, or Coke. These are very big water consumers. And they will start thinking about how to manage this water risk and how to manage their own. So there will be a direct reflection of their path to net zero and how water actually features in them. They are already talking to us about this. Second, the other side of private is the interest in private finance to invest in this area. And I think this is where we need to, there is a lot of interest in this, but if we don't have investable project, that interest will not end, the money would not end in a place we want to. Because if there's private finance, they could fund a offshore wind in Denmark. The offshore wind in Denmark would be financed anyway. This is a investable proposition. You don't need some special finance. I mean, we need to see how this money actually goes to offshore water resource management in sub-Saharan country. For that, I think there needs to be a step change in how do we make sure these countries are ready, the systems are ready to receive. And that's where I think collectively, Frannie, for all of us on our community to focus on, because there's a private sector interest, how do we make sure it goes to the right place? And I also think the private finance, which you are much bigger expert than I am, that interest to be net zero and focus on this was very encouraging to hear. I mean, this is the initial steps here. We have to figure out what that means. How does the money flow? How do we make it transparent? But I think those were very encouraging things for us.
Well, thank you very much, Annie, for those perspectives. And I'm very pleased to say that because the next COP is going to be the first COP in Africa, we have an opportunity to dig deeper on these issues between now and then, because first, the water crisis is unique in the African context because of the geographical and water distribution issues that you mentioned. Second, Africa is urbanizing in a different way. It's industrializing in a different way. And therefore, the way it will use water going forward would also be different from the rest of the world. Third, Africa has an opportunity to innovate and think differently about how it provides water for its various activities, including for supporting human life, agriculture, and industrialization. And just as it did with telecoms, with banking, and now with energy, there is an opportunity to innovate in that space. And finally, because of these unique financing solutions that are coming to the table, and the fact that we'll be in a country, Egypt, that has been grappling with all the challenges from historical ancient days on how to use water sustainably, I believe we have a chance to get some innovation at that upcoming COP. So I would like to thank you very much for taking time with us today. and to particularly thank IBRAF for once again working with SouthBridge to bring these conversations to the fore, and to thank Professor João Monte for his innovation and leadership that allows these kind of conversations to take place. Thank you very much. I ask the audience to join me in thanking Dr. Ani Dasgupta for spending time with us here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frannie. It's a pleasure to be with you.